Hello, my name is Marty Mollengrath, and I'm the minister at Unionville Presbyterian Church, and I'm talking to you on behalf of the Local and World Missions Committee of the Oak Ridges Presbytery. As a missions committee, we have charged ourselves to try to help the rest of the presbytery understand the reality and the need for reconciliation, as was the call 5 years ago by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission headed by Senator Murray Sinclair. And if you do recall, there were 94 calls to action that came out of that Truth and Reconciliation report. One of the calls to action had to do with education for the churches, to make ourselves aware of what the issues and concerns were, things like treaties. And today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about treaty. The land that we live and work and breathe and worship on as an Oak Ridges Presbytery is part of the Williams Treaty of 1923. And that Williams Treaty was made between, at that time, the government and the church, and the Haudenosaunee and many other Anishinaabe peoples that populated this land. And that treaty still marks our relationships. Anyone who lives here in Canada is a treaty person. We are all treaty people. The treaty relationships were relationships that were meant to last in perpetuity. And they had to do with a sense of deep caring and sharing between different nations. At that time, the nations within the Williams Treaty conferred with and talked with the government and the church. And the result was this Williams Treaty. And in many ways, it was to reflect a treaty that was already in place among other nations before the white man arrived. That treaty is known as the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. And the Dish with One Spoon Treaty is a recognition that the land is a dish. The land with all of its resources, with all of its beautiful trees and the creatures, the land, the animals, the birds, the fish in the rivers, the water, all of this was to be shared. It was not a whole lot of spoons competing for the resources of the land, but rather one spoon sharing the resources with the land for all of those who were part of that treaty, so that all would prosper, so that all would be able to have a livelihood where they could care for each other, care for their children, and look to the future with some hope. The treaties often, including the Williams Treaty, were often accompanied with symbols of that treaty, a wampum belt. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a wampum belt, but a wampum belt is made out of beads, intricately hand-woven beads. And often the wampum belt would show two canoes floating down the same river, two canoes side by side, each in their own portion of the river, but sharing that river, living side by side as equals. That was the intent of the treaty. Now, as Christians, we also understand treaty, because treaty, another word for treaty could be, in our Christian vocabulary, covenant, sacred covenant. Indeed, the Mennonite Church here in Canada is undergoing a variety of studies entitled Treaty as Sacred Covenant. And when we think about that, that's what treaties are. They are sacred covenants. They are agreements that we come together before God, that we enter into in terms of our sense of spirituality, our reliance on God, to care for each other, to nurture each other, to support each other. It's this concept of treaty as sacred covenant that I want to introduce to you today. Because what it means is that we have responsibilities even to this day, and our children and children's children will also have responsibilities to live up to those sacred covenants that were made in this part of the country in 1923 through the Williams Treaty. Since that time, almost 100 years since that time, you can see that generally speaking, immigrants and white people within this country have done fairly well. First Nations, Inuit and Métis, including those here in this land, have not fared so well. Poverty, struggle, community dysfunction, all as a result of a failure to live up to treaties, is very, very real. And this injustice needs to be addressed. So I would encourage you to think about yourselves, each and every one of us, as being treaty people in relationship with First Nations here in this land. And I would also encourage you to consider and to think of treaty as sacred covenant, to explore that and to recognize our responsibilities to live up to our part of that treaty. On behalf of the local and world commissions, the World Missions Committee of the Presbytery of Oak Ridges, I thank you for your time. Thank you.